This is a new version of an old video. Indeed, the first ProRes video I uploaded in 2019 on the main Kim Justice channel. It didn't last awfully long there, but it was the video that sent me down this road. This wrestling channel certainly wouldn't be here without it. This version features some necessary changes, a re-record of the audio, different music, and assorted copyright things, but other than that, I didn't want to change too much about the text, just a couple of important little additions, mainly at the end. The older version is still around on YouTube, thanks to Reliving Wrestling Uploaded for keeping it kicking around all this time. But with all that said, enjoy. 16 years have passed since an event that shocked the wrestling world, particularly those like me who've spent a good chunk of their fandom watching Japanese wrestling, ProRes. For us, especially those who started watching in the 90s, one name stood out over them all, even in an entire collection of legendary Hall of Fame stars. And that name was Mitsuharu Misawa, the greatest of them all. In the 90s, he was to Japanese wrestling what Bret, Austin, The Rock and Triple H were combined to the WWE. There was no one more popular, and arguably there was no one better. And on June 13th, 2009, he passed away. More than that, he passed away in the ring. There have been others who have suffered the same tragic fate, but none of them were as high up as Misawa. At the time of his death, he wasn't just the president of his own wrestling company, he was still right at the very top of the card when, really, in all measures except popularity, he absolutely shouldn't have been. Misawa's death should have been preventable. It shouldn't have happened, because he should have, by that point in his career, done more than enough to walk his weary body off into the sunset. This was not a wrestler who died in the very prime of his conditioning. This is a story of someone continuing far beyond a point where they should have stopped, not even because they wanted to or they were addicted to that rush, but because they felt they had to. This is the story of Mitsuharu Misawa's final years and his final reign as the champion of his company, Pro Wrestling Noah. Now, for those who are not familiar, why do we call Misawa one of the best wrestlers of all time? Well, where do you even start? You could fill up several videos with his greatest accomplishments, but we can summarise from the beginning. The legend of Mitsuharu Misawa in many ways began in All Japan Pro Wrestling on May 14, 1990 when, under the famous Tiger Mask, he teamed with fellow youngster Toshiaki Kawada against the tough veteran team of Hiromichi Fuyuki and Yoshiaki Yatsu. Midway through a struggle of a match, suddenly Misawa signals to Kawada to untie the mask, revealing a face that was familiar to the crowd already, a promising young lion who'd taken a trip to Mexico and had returned under the tiger mask. So this was his coming of age. With Misawa freed from the mask and almost reborn, he and Kawada make short work of Fuyuki and Yatsu, and Mitsuharu Misawa is immediately massively over with the crowd. Less than a month later, Misawa takes on All Japan's top homegrown talent and one of the very best in the history of the business, Jumbo Tsuruta. Technical wizard, former Olympian, and multiple champion who had picked a fight with Misawa mere weeks prior in a tag bout. By all measures, even with Misawa's newfound spirit, the match should still be a win for Tsuruta. But Misawa surprises Jumbo by matching his pace every step of the way, sticking with him for 25 minutes of some of the best wrestling in front of one of the hottest crowds you're ever likely to hear, and then the unthinkable. Misawa reverses a Jumbo pinfall attempt and gets the 3 count. The crowd absolutely erupts. Truly, a new hero was born. Now, the story goes that on the night of the show, with Jumbo penciled in to win, All Japan's boss and head booker, Giant Bubba, a legend in his own right, heard how electric the crowd was and how they were so behind Misawa well before the match had even begun, and so he changed the finish. He recognised the moment. It helped that a couple of months previously, Genichiro Tenryu, one of All Japan's top stars, had left the promotion, but it was quite the masterstroke to pick Misawa essentially as his replacement. Almost overnight, Mitsuharu Misawa became the top face in All Japan, and he wouldn't relinquish that position for a decade. Misawa's career progressed from there, through the ensuing raging 2-year feud that Victory kicked off with the furious Jumbo Tsuruta and his army, representing All Japan's old guard fighting against the young team of Misawa, Kawada and Kenta Kobashi. There would be multiple Triple Crown title reigns, a decade-defining series of matches with Toshiaki Kawada, not to mention similarly classic matches against many other opponents: Kabashi, Stan Hansen, Akira Taue, Vader, Steve Williams, Jun Akiyama. The list is virtually endless. These wrestlers developed a signature All Japan style called Kin's Road that purposefully differentiated them from rival New Japan's Strong style. These matches often centred around ever bigger and more devastating moves, moments of fighting spirits where wrestlers push through their opponent's moves in order to deliver an equalising or even greater riposte, plenty of references and callbacks in longer feuds, and gradually pushing crowds to a frenzied crescendo. And when tape trading and particularly internet started to pick up in the 90s, these matches were just about the first thing everyone wanted. Misawa, Kabashi, Kawada and company became famous all over the internet wrestling community. Eventually, however, following the death of Giant Bubba in 1999 and a dispute with his widow Motoko, Misawa ended up moving on to a whole new promotion, one that he formed himself, called Pro Wrestling Noah. Noah started up in 2000, and it's a measure of Misawa's popularity not just with fans, but how much of a leader he was seen as by other wrestlers, that all but 2 native All Japan wrestlers followed Misawa to his new promotion, where Misawa would be president and indeed inaugural champion. Noah was very much still in the classic Kin's Road formula, and fans responded positively to it immediately, to the point where the new promotion almost immediately replaced All Japan in the majority of fans' minds. Eventually, their main title, the Global Honored Crown, or GHC for short, Heavyweight Championship, becomes the property of Kenta Kobashi in March of 2003, following another one of the very greatest bouts to ever take place inside the squared circle. This means that Misawa is no longer the top star of the company. Still, he is the company's president with plenty of other duties to take on, so perhaps after 13 years at the very top, most of which were spent as champion, he can take it a bit easier and concentrate on other matters. At least that's what should have happened. Let's go to 2005. After beating Misawa in 2003, Kenta Kobashi held the title for 2 years in one of the greatest reigns in the history of wrestling. The matches against the likes of Jun Akiyama, Akira Taue and Yoshihiro Takayama were incredible, and they made Noah the company that they were, one of the hottest in the world. Finally, after 735 days, Kobashi loses the GHC Heavyweight Championship on March 5th to a guy named Takeshi Rikio. Rikio is one of Noah's pet projects, a former sumo star who transitioned to wrestling and was trained by none other than Kobashi and Misawa himself. He's had some success in Noah's tag divisions, but him beating Kobashi for the title is a shocker. Sometimes though, as we've seen, a shock like this can work out. In the case of Rikio, it didn't particularly work out well. The fans didn't take to him. He wasn't bought as being on the top level of the company. While he had the physique for sure, he was just a pretty average worker. Not a bad one at all, and someone who'd taken to wrestling very quickly, but he wasn't a potential all-time great by any means. His 3 title defences aren't particularly anything to write home about at all, even though one of them was against Misawa. Even the rub from him wasn't enough to convince the fans of Rikio's star quality. Despite these endorsements, it seems as though Noah kinda know this. At their big July 18th Tokyo Dome show, headlined by the final Misawa-Kawada match and an all-time classic between Kobashi and Kensuke Sasaki, Takeshi Rikio's GHC title defense, a cross-promotional bout against young New Japan ace Hiroshi Tanahashi, happens in the middle of the card. It's not often that such things happen on Japanese supercards where the title is almost always in the main event. Here, even an utterly middling match between Tenryu, just returned, and Yoshinari Ogawa gets better billing. Even the selection of Tanahashi as Rikio's opponent, young and definitely getting over in New Japan, but far from his peak a few years later, speaks volumes about Rikio's position. It is pretty clear that he is a mid-carder in a main event spot, and as soon as his reign ends, he's going back down there. And sure enough, on November the 11th, the Rikio experiment ends when he loses to Akira Taue, ending Rikio's time in the main event pretty much for good. He was never the star Misawa and Kobashi wanted him to be, and injuries ended his career prematurely a few years later. Taue is an immensely popular fan favourite. He's part of the legendary All Japan Quartet, the Four Corners of Heaven, alongside Misawa, Kobashi and Kawada. But even in 2005, he's 44 years old and obviously isn't going to hold the title for long. This is a quick, feel-good reign. And so, on January 22nd, 2006, he drops the title to Jun Akiyama. Now, Akiyama is a guy who has quite literally been waiting for nearly a decade to really be given a solid run at the top spot, because if there was a fifth spot in the aforementioned Corners of Heaven, well, it would probably be his. He has consistently been one of Noah's top performers, just as he was for All Japan before that, one of the best workers of all time. And yet he has a record of just about always coming up short against the big opponents. He's held the top belt before, but never for too long. Victories against the likes of Misawa and Kobashi are rare. In many ways, Toshiaki Kawada had a similar problem. As amazing as he was also seemingly always booked to never get it done when it mattered. He feuded with Misawa for over a decade, but it took him 6 years to finally beat him in a singles match for the title. Akiyama had similar issues, but now it seems is his chance. But again, well, it just kinda doesn't really happen for him. Booking seems to be the main culprit here. Once again, the matches just don't seem to work out. Minoru Suzuki is a strong opponent, but their match never quite seems to click. Masawa Inoue? Well, a long-time undercard wrestler who gets a one-tour program for the title almost as a thank you, not a serious threat. Once again, there is the sense that Noah are never willing to go all the way with Jun Akiyama as their top guy. He'd perhaps have been a favourite among many to end Kobashi's incredible reign, but in the end he beats a popular but past his prime Taue for the belt. He's the champion, but in a roundabout way that doesn't involve actually defeating the real top guns. It's little things like this that end up speaking volumes about his status in the company. Always the bridesmaid, never the bride. And then shockingly, on the 9th of September, Jun Akiyama drops the strap to Naomichi Marufuji. This is quite the big deal. Marufuji is a huge talent, a young talent, one of the best wrestlers in the company, but he doesn't at all fit the traditional formula. This is a guy who'd mostly wrestled in the junior division, alongside another massive and popular talent, Kenta. These guys are fantastic, the crowd love them, wrestling fans all over the world love them, but still Marufuji winning the belt is quite a surprise. Even so, while all this tumultuous fiddling about with the main title is going on, business is still doing fine. There's plenty of hugely popular matches and great wrestling and all that, and hey, the main men are still around. Kobashi may have lost the belt, but he's still a huge attraction on every card. In 2006, this man is, after all, arguably the best wrestler on the entire planet. And Misawa is still there. Now, it should be said that in 2006, Misawa is pretty damn far from being the best wrestler on the planet. Misawa still had plenty of skill, of course, but by this time he was very much out of shape, working with lots of long and nagging injuries. All of those many years and those epic bouts had clearly taken their toll, not to mention spending the last few years running a major wrestling company on top of that. It wouldn't necessarily be fair to characterise Misawa in 2006 as being a completely spent force, but it's not like he was having that many must-watch matches anymore. By now he was generally best in tag bouts, where other younger talents would do most of the work and allow Misawa to take the veteran role, come in, take a few bumps, deliver some elbows and tiger drivers to pop the crowd huge without exerting himself as much as he would have before. However, then the unthinkable happened. During a routine checkup on June 22nd, Kenta Kobashi was found to have a sizable tumour in his right kidney, which eventually was diagnosed as cancerous. He was Noah's top star in all categories, from talent to drawing power, but now he was out of commission, on the shelf for the foreseeable future. Cancer wouldn't have much of a chance against Kobashi in the end, he beat it up good and proper, but still it was nearly 18 months before he returned to the ring. The absence of Noah's top star for that time was a huge hole, and how on earth do you fill it? Kobashi's diagnosis was undoubtedly one of the reasons why Noah made the shock decision to give Marufuji the belt. With most of the younger heavyweight options already tried and exhausted, or just not ready, they turned to the junior division and one of its most popular stars. But once again, Marufuji was not a success on top. Aside from a typically excellent title defense against Nigel McGuinness on an ROH show in the US, he only had one defense on a Noah card, against his former partner and rival, Kenta. The two, needless to say, had an outstanding match, by any measure one of the best of its year, but it wasn't that much of a draw. Perhaps Marufuji and Kenta not being traditional heavyweights was a turn-off for the crowd, even if they were amongst the world's top talents? It's hard to make that sudden transition, especially when the top of the card, for many years, has been nothing but heavyweights. People are used to seeing these guys steal the show in the mid-card, as a company's junior divisions are often booked to do. Unfortunately, they don't seem to take them quite as well at the very top of the card. Three markedly different wrestlers, Rikio, Akiyama and Marufuji, had been positioned at the top of the company, and none of them had worked out. How come? What was the problem? In many ways, this was a problem that had plagued Noah, and in many ways All Japan before the split, their failure to create new stars at the top. In so many cases, especially with Jun Akiyama, they'd waited far too long to actually pull the trigger, to the point where fans don't believe that they could ever truly be the top guy. We tend not to think of the lengthy time that the likes of Misawa and Kobashi spent at the top in terms of talent being held down, perhaps because of their incredible talent and the fact that they were absolutely the best thing going. But now, with one on the shelf and the other on the wane, not making anyone had put them in a fair bit of trouble. And what was the solution now? Picking a champion involves choosing someone who is not only popular enough, but healthy enough and able to put on the high-intensity, high-risk matches that Noah are famous for. Noah find themselves with almost no one to fill this position. They've spurned Akiyama yet again, and Rikio was already a failure. There's a couple of names that are knocking on the door of the top level: the beastly heavyweight Takeshi Morishima, the fiery and young Go Shiozaki, and of course Kenta. But who's to say that they won't have the same issues that all the others have had on top? They're all in this awkward position where it's another big risk. Genichiro Tenryu is popular but far too old for the job, just like Akira Taue. Freelancers like Kensuke Sasaki and Minoru Suzuki have other commitments that they don't exactly want to give up. Yoshihiro Takayama is another main event talent who was booked on the top level, but he's literally just come back from a near career-ending stroke that put him on the shelf for 2 years, and he isn't ready to go back to the top right now. Who can Noah possibly turn to? Well, I think you know the answer to that. On December 10th, 2006, Naomichi Marufuji defends his title against Misawa in the Nippon Budokan, a venue that Misawa has headlined a ludicrous amount of times. The resulting match is one of Misawa's best singles bouts in a long time. Marufuji matches him blow for blow, and Misawa is giving all that he's got, even pulling out some old spots from his own days as a junior. In the end, Marufuji nails a superkick and goes for his signature finish, the Shiranui. Misawa reverses, powers him onto the second rope, and from there hits his own finish, a super Emerald Flosion. 3 slaps of the mat later, and the crowd goes absolutely bananas. As is his custom, the stoic Misawa does not have much to say after another major victory. The victory speaks for itself. In a time of trouble, the man at the top has taken it upon himself to carry the load. Mitsuharu Misawa is 44 years old, overweight, carrying plenty of injuries and wear and tear, smokes cigarettes like they're going out of style, is the president of the company with many duties to perform, and, for the 3rd time, he is Noah's GHC heavyweight champion. Misawa's title reign begins with several challengers facing the company, both from inside and out. The inside challengers of actually trying to make new stars we've covered already, but there's also the main challenge of keeping business strong. Noah was at the time Japan's biggest wrestling company. New Japan was the closest competitor, but the standard of their shows was way poorer, and All Japan were a very distant third, stabilised but barely going. Japanese wrestling on the whole was going down in popularity. Over the course of the 2000s it lost a lot of fans to the booming MMA scene, as typified by Pride and K1. Although MMA itself was on a downturn, especially after a 2006 scandal that revealed the Yakuza's hefty links to Pride and ultimately helped to kill said company. But those fans leaving MMA weren't going back to wrestling. A lot of this also has to do with exposure, seeing as wrestling coverage on TV usually only happened in the wee small hours. Even in the glory days, wrestling was usually a late night programme on Japanese network TV, particularly on Nippon TV, which Noah broadcasted on. But with business going down, the reach of the company was becoming ever more limited, and that state of affairs only made it even harder for companies like Noah to push new stars onto people. The decision to put the title on Misawa made sense from a commercial perspective, even if it didn't from almost any other angle. While you couldn't question his skill, his conditioning was hardly that of a main event champion. He had so much mileage on his body already. He should be taking it easy, not pushing it all the way up to 11, which, being champion, he obviously would do. He was still the biggest star by far, but Noah had booked themselves into a corner and, aside from Kobashi, they had no other star that was even remotely close to Misawa's level. This mirrored the problems that faced All Japan back in the late 90s, when business started to slowly dwindle following the glory days earlier in the decade. For all the amazing wrestling there had been, they had struggled when it came to actually creating a serious, main event level star. The Misawa era in AJPW and Noah from 1992 to 2006, if you were really going to be harsh about it, had only made Misawa himself and Kenta Kobashi be homegrown stars on the level where they could, as individuals, carry the company on their back. You could, and indeed perhaps should, add Kawada, Akiyama and Taue to that list, but none of them had ever actually had the chance to get a proper, full reign on top, serving only as transitional champs. A lot of this had to do with Misawa being such an immense talent. He was presented as the best because, well, he was. But if anything happens to Misawa, if anything happens to Kobashi, suddenly the companies become very fragile indeed. So let's have a look at Misawa's reign. It was the longest one since Kobashi's 2-year reign. Misawa was the champion for 13 months, successfully defending the belt 7 times. No one really expected him to be the champion for that long, all things considered, but that's just the way things happened. Alas, not all of these title matches are readily available, but we can see most of them. The first one I was able to find was his second one, a 28th April 2007 bout against Takuma Sano. Now this is what I would call a run-of-the-mill GHC title defence. Sano is a journeyman wrestler who generally operates in the mid-card, but someone like him can easily be a contender for one of Noah's tours. He's a bulky heavyweight who's mostly known for strikes, in particular his rolling soul-butt kicks, which he does endlessly. Does anyone believe that he's going to beat Misawa and become the champion? No, but he's a solid enough hand that the end result should be, at least, a good match. And the end result is exactly that. Sano takes control early, punishing Misawa with soul butts and double stomps, even doing some top rope moves, a callback to his early 90s days as a junior, when he and Jushin Liger produced some phenomenal work. It's a pretty good match for Misawa, a definite styles clash, but Sano relies on heavy strikes instead of brutal head drops. After a long period of Sano control, Misawa finally pushes back. There is a great moment that sums up one of Misawa's unique qualities: his stoicism. For a wrestler who was a master of a storytelling-focused style based around fighting spirit and grand exclamations of courage, the loud roars of Kobashi, Kawada and all that, Misawa is surprisingly expressionless. And yet, after another soul butt, Misawa simply wipes himself off and continues, and this small expression is enough to make the crowd go wild. Misawa's elbows ultimately win out against Sano's kicks, and eventually a rare move, the Death Valley Driver variation of his Emerald Flosion, is enough to put the challenger away. It is a perfectly decent match, hamstrung a little both by Sano's generally limited moveset and a pretty quiet crowd that doesn't take him seriously as a challenger, but an acceptable main event all the same. The next match here pits Misawa against a very familiar foe, Akira Taue. They meet on July 15th, 2007 at the Nippon Budokan. What can be said about these two? They've been rivals in both singles and tag competition for nearly 20 years. Taue is the huge crowd favourite. He's got the combination of being a loved veteran and being an underdog against the champion. And so this match is a rare chance to see Misawa go full on heel, which he does so admirably. This is a perfect matchup for the champion. Misawa and Taue know each other so well and can call back on no end of matches that they've had, and Misawa can work from the top, taking all steps to snuff out Taue's chances of getting into the match. He uses various submissions, including his dreaded face lock. It may be basically a rest hold for the combatants, but it looks like a straight up neck crank. He tends to hold them in as well, eliciting that rarest of things, boos from the crowd for Misawa. And when Taue does get in the match, hitting his own signature moves like the Nadawa Otoshi, Dynamic Bomb and Origa Taue, the crowd erupts. We've got moments of fighting spirit here and there, some great back and forth stuff, and a hot crowd too. This is in the same venue that felt rather flat for the defence against Sano, but they're totally different here. Unsurprisingly, seeing as they know and love Taue so much. But there is no fairy tale ending. Misawa finally assumes full control and drops Taue with a sickening Emerald Flosion Kai to finish a very good match indeed, one of the best we'll see in this video. It's Taue's final shot at the big title. He spends the next few years largely in tag matches before retiring. Before the next match, Noah ran a tournament featuring most of their best talent to decide who would be Misawa's next contender at the culmination of one of their signature yearly tours, The Great Voyage. In the end, Naomichi Marufuji would secure his rematch against Misawa by beating Takeshi Morishima in the final, and the bout takes place on the 29th of September in Osaka. This is quite the different match to the one where Misawa became the champion. That was all about Misawa rolling back the years, often pulling out moves we hadn't seen in a long time in order to reclaim his crown. This one is more a battle of the crafty veteran against the speedy youngster. Misawa cannot match Marufuji's pace, but he can use his Rin wiles to slow him down. But not all the time. Misawa spends a fair bit of time here on the bottom, getting caught out by Marufuji's pace and his greater powers of recovery. It all sounds like it should be the setup for a really good match, and 2/3 of it get there. Alas, the match totally falls apart in the last third. It's the sort of match that could be used as evidence to show that Misawa really isn't fit enough to be here. This is a longer and faster paced match than the other two we've seen, and by the end of it Misawa is utterly gassed. There are two very bad botches at the finish. In one, Misawa goes for a tiger driver off the top rope, but ends up slipping and ultimately the move comes to nothing. They basically just fall to the ground. Straight after that is an even worse botch. Misawa picks Marufuji up for an Emerald Flosion, but drops him midway through, straight onto his head. It's very ugly, as is the ensuing Emerald Flosion afterwards, possibly the worst delivered one of Misawa's career. It is the sort of shock loss of strength in the arms that speaks not only to tiredness and fatigue, but also to neck problems. Shortly after this, Misawa finishes the match with an Emerald Flosion Kai. Despite the tournament win to get a shot, Marufuji is, like many others, unable to convert against Misawa. The crowd, alas, are largely flat for the whole match, especially for the botched finish. Marufuji is a very good wrestler indeed, but the crowd just don't really get behind him. He may be the next generation of the company, but at this moment, it just wasn't happening. They just can't get enough people to really notice and really care. Noah go outside for Misawa's next opponent, Samoa Joe. The lens star of TNA already had a pretty fabled match in ROH a couple of years back against Kenta Kobashi, and now he's in Japan to try and take Misawa's belt. This is a different sort of match here. Although Joe hasn't really done anything at all in Noah, his presence means that Joe and Misawa can work one of the most traditional Japanese matches, that of the homegrown hero versus the heel foreigner. That and, well, this is also a very fresh matchup. As a result of this, the crowd kind of get more into this match than they did for the Marufuji bout, which again might not necessarily be a good thing, but hey ho. The match itself is okay. There's the occasional bit of miscommunication between the two, but it's a solid brawl of a bout. Nothing technically amazing, but they certainly go, and Misawa takes some pretty big bumps for Joe before eventually finishing him with an Emerald Flosion followed by a sick elbow to the back of the head. Some might think that finish a bit underwhelming, but elbows are Misawa's favoured strike, have finished many opponents, and one to the back of the head? Yeah, that's a pretty good finish. Misawa continues to prevail. His next successful title defence wouldn't take place in Japan. Only a week or so after the Joe bout, he travels to the States for a rare appearance at ROH's Glory by Honour 6, where he defends the belt against Kenta. Immediately this match has some good things going for it, this being an American crowd who know and love Misawa and have likely never seen him live in the flesh before. They're gonna go wild for everything. That and they know Kenta pretty well already. He's done a lot of good stuff in Ring of Honor, perhaps as much as he's done in Noah. The result is, by some distance, the best match of Misawa's reign. He turns on the burners as much as he possibly can for this bout, and Kenta does the rest. He's able to help take Misawa to the second last truly great singles match of his career, a hell of a fight that, honestly, barely lets up. Really, this is the only match so far where you really truly think that the contender has a serious chance of winning. Kenta's hot enough and the location's different enough that you think they just might go for him, and by this point there was only one other credible homegrown talent who could do it. We'll get to him shortly. In the end, Misawa just about prevails with an Emerald Flosion Kai. I think of this match as basically everything the second Marufuji match should have been. It's similar, but conducted with a lot more fire, and pulled off flawlessly by both parties. Definitely worth finding this match and checking it out. And so, having won the table in 2007, it's around 4 months before Misawa defends the belt again, on the 2nd of March against Takeshi Morishima. Morishima, like Kenta, is one of the hottest wrestlers around. If not in Japan, then definitely in America. He actually had the very first match of Misawa's reign, which we couldn't find. He came up short, but then went to Ring of Honor and, shockingly, became the world champion there. His near 8-month run involved several amazing bouts, particularly against the likes of Kenta, Bryan Danielson and Nigel McGuinness, definitely one of the wrestlers of that year. This burly, Terry Gordy-esque, kind of baby-faced 300-pounder, it seemed, had all the qualities required to be Noah's champion. The look, the skill, the intensity. He was hot property, and now he just needed the win. In the early going here, Misawa can do very little except survive. Morishima is younger, faster, stronger and more violent. Any mistake that Misawa makes is severely punished. Lariats, boots, power bombs. Hell, just to flat out sitting on him is enough. Everything that Morishima does looks vicious. He's that sort of wrestler. Smash mouth, as JR would say. Misawa gets hope spots here and there, but Morishima even gets the better of the fighting spirit sections, the battles of elbow and boot that usually you would expect Misawa to win. The Nippon Budokan crowd is hotter for this match than they have been for any other match except the one against Taue. It does seem that finally, in the shape of Morishima, they believe in a credible threat. The final run starts with a great equaliser. Misawa gets a chance to heavily punish Morishima, and does so with an Emerald Flosion on the floor. This sets up a typical escalating Misawa finishing sequence, several brutal elbow shots, an Emerald Flosion. All of this, Morishima survives. The crowd stomps their feet and chants, but it's for Morishima. All of a sudden, after Misawa's best shots have failed to put him down, the challenger finds another level. He hits forearms, lariats, and powers Misawa into a backdrop for a 2.9. Now, it seems, is the time. At last, Morishima nails Misawa with a final, brutal backdrop driver. And he's done it. Morishima defeats Misawa in what is, honestly, a great match, the last great singles bout of Misawa's career, and becomes the new GHC heavyweight champion. After the amazing 2007 that he's had, this here, in 2008, should be the start of a new era, a career-making and ultimately decisive victory against an all-time great that at last brings another person to the very top. Misawa's reign on top may have been long and at times questionable, but it can't be doubted that in the end he put Takeshi Morishima over big. The crowd goes wild for his victory at the end, and it seems pretty assured that Morishima is going to be the ace for some time to come. Perhaps now, after this long and grueling title reign, Misawa can rest up a little. Anyone want to guess how long Takeshi Morishima's reign at the top lasted? Well, it was only about 6 months. In the end, he only defended the belt twice, against his old tag partner and former GHC champ Takeshi Rikio, remember him, and against another hot up-and-coming prospect, Takashi Sagura. But in September 2008, he loses the belt. But who to? Another hot, homegrown prospect? Someone like Kenta or Naomichi Marufuji? No, he loses it to Kensuke Sasaki. Sasaki is a freelancer, a main event level talent who has literally just come off of a lengthy reign as All Japan's Triple Crown champion. Noah fans know him pretty well. His match with Kenta Kobashi in 2005 is arguably the greatest in the company's history after all. But a homegrown talent he is most certainly not. His main event name has been made for years, mostly in New Japan, before he became a freelancer and set up his own Kensuke office of himself, his loving wife and Joshi Pro-Res legend Akira Hokuto, and helpfully, another very hot young prospect by the name of Katsuhiko Nakajima. So, again, what happened with Morishima? To be honest, this time really it was events that no one could have control over. We are now in 2008, after all. The credit crunch and the global recession starts to hit. Business is down for basically everyone, everywhere. It's hardly just wrestling. And so Noah continues to flounder ever further. Their TV slots, exposure, and ultimately attendances on an inexorable downturn. They turn to Kensuke Sasaki as a popular talent to boost the shows, a quick fix if you will, although he will use the promotion as his home base for a number of years. Circumstances have, once again, stopped Noah from truly being able to create a major top-level homegrown talent, even with the amazing wrestlers they had on the books. In this instance at least, it does seem like it was more down to bad luck rather than bad decisions. Sasaki alone isn't enough to stop the rot. Only one name can really do that being Kobashi. He was already back by this time. He'd kicked the hell out of cancer and had been wrestling in nothing but tag matches, with the thought of slowly bringing him back up to the main event where he belonged. But again, fate has other ideas. In September, Kobashi goes back on the shelf again, requiring surgery for nerve damage in both of his arms. Apparently this was largely a result of the tens of thousands of hard knife-edged chops he delivered over the years. Once again, he's out of commission and Noah can't catch a break. Although he was naturally as over as ever, Kobashi would never quite manage a consistent return to the top level before finally he chose to retire from the ring in May of 2013. And as for Misawa, well, largely because of all this drama and all this what, he still can't give over. He has to remain at or near the top of the card, mostly in multi-man matches, but as things get worse for the company, he has to continue to go further. He ends up taking Go Shiozaki under his wing, another guy who's really knocking on the door of the main event, and they win the 2009 Global Tag League. Go Shiozaki does most of the work in their matches, of course. He'll do the selling, most of the bumps and the face-in peril spots while Misawa comes in and cleans house, maybe only taking a couple of bumps here and there in the process. But still, as they are being positioned as a top tag team in the company, this is hardly exhibition level work. But things continue to go downhill. In May of 2009, as a direct result of the recession, Nippon TV cancels all wrestling programming, including Noah's Power Hour. This means there is no wrestling at all on Japanese network television, ending a tradition that stretched all the way back to the 1950s and the days of Wikidozan, and there is now even less exposure for Noah's stars. It continues to get worse, but nothing could prepare Noah for what happened next. On June 13, 2009, at the Green Arena in Hiroshima, the team of Misawa and Shiozaki take on Bison Smith and Akitoshi Saito in the main event of the evening. Smith and Saito are the tag champions, and this was a long and grueling tag match with, as usual, Shiozaki taking the brunt of the punishment. Around the 25-minute mark, Misawa leads a charge, but in doing so he will take a bump. Akitoshi Saito hits him with a backdrop driver. And then, nothing. Misawa says to the referee that he cannot move and then passes out. The match is immediately stopped. No footage exists of the match in question, or of the suplex, although it was filmed and it was photographed. All that does exist really is the aftermath, where wrestlers crowd around the fallen Misawa and try to assist him, alongside a doctor pulled from the audience giving CPR. As the house lights come on, the crowd gradually become aware that something terrible has happened, chanting Misawa's name, sometimes wailing it. Eventually, EMTs arrive, and Misawa is taken from Lorin and rushed to hospital. But it's too late. It is announced shortly thereafter that Mitsuharu Misawa died of a cardiac arrest at the age of 46. They say that he died at the hospital, although it's likelier that he died in Lorin. There were no EMTs on hand at the arena. If there had been, there's a chance Misawa's life might have been saved, but he would have almost certainly been paralysed. The backdrop itself was not a particularly hefty one by Misawa's standards. Although the head and neck did hit the canvas, as it should have done, it most certainly was not a botched move in any sense. What it was, though, was the straw that broke the camel's back. Misawa was working hard with the sort of neck injuries that forced the likes of Edge and Steve Austin to retire, at least for a long time, as another bad bump could have paralysed them, or worse. And the backdrop was that bump. It caused a catastrophic spinal cord injury, similar to that which paralysed Christopher Reeve, and in turn this brought along the cardiac arrest that took Misawa's life. A shocking and desperately sad end to a legendary career, and the life of one of the very greatest and best-loved professional wrestlers who ever lived. One of the saddest details about the whole thing, though, is that Misawa was painfully aware that this could be his fate, and yet he felt he was unable to stop for the sake of his company. We go to Hisami and her excellent Noah's Archive blog. She translates a lot of articles regarding Noah, and this one's from June 2019. Essentially, Misawa had a premonition about dying in Lorin, and 2 years before his passing, he wrote a letter which he gave to a close friend, telling him to pass this on to his final opponent when what he felt was fated occurred. And so, shortly after June 13th, 2009, this letter was given to Akitoshi Saito. It read simply, "You trusted me, and you applied your technique with all your strength, and I couldn't respond to it. I am sorry. I want you to continue wrestling. It may be painful, but I want you to continue." This was, indeed, a letter that would help Akitoshi Saito to continue wrestling in the aftermath of the tragedy, and he would always carry it with him. In terms of Misawa's whole legacy, these last few years are a strange time. He was giving everything he could in the hopes of maintaining Noah as a successful business, even if the matches themselves largely weren't as good as they were in the past. But match quality seems like such a trivial thing to even think about. You just wish more than anything that Misawa didn't feel as though he had to do it. By the time he became the GHC champion again, he probably shouldn't have been in the ring. He'd done enough in his career by that point that he should have been able to happily retire to the front office and be with his family. He was already a legend, a Hall of Famer many times over, but he felt as though he couldn't quit, even though he was basically risking his life every time that he went out there. It is a sad story about just how much our favourite wrestlers give of themselves just for our entertainment. It is a harsh livelihood, and often it doesn't matter who you are or how big you've been, it can take everything back, and then some. Noah as a company is still around today. In the immediate aftermath of Misawa's death, they carried on. Akira Taue took the reins as company president, with Naomichi Marufuji becoming his second in command. Jun Akiyama, along with several others, took a look at their own bodies after Misawa's death and made the decision to take time away from the ring. The heavyweight title eventually stabilised for the level that the company were at thanks to Shiozaki, Morishima and Takashi Sugiura. That level wasn't as big as the company was in the mid-2000s, and there would definitely still be some very heavy times ahead, but it was a level that was enough for Noah eventually to keep going. At present, with Japanese wrestling on the rise over the past few years, and a roster made up of well-established young guns along with the now veteran likes of Marufuji and Sugiura, Noah is considered to be a promotion on the upswing, and generally in decent nick. They do make a product that's worth checking out. But the company's founder, first president, and superstar will always be in their hearts. He gave everything for the promotion. In the end, more than he ever should have had to. Bye for now.